Welcome to also our first concurrent session. Just in case you're lost, we are in Ballroom 150, and it's the AI, Efficiency, Engagement, and Fairness topic. This session is proudly brought to you by our gold sponsor, Sapiens. We'll be doing some Q&A, no clapping for Sapien. We'll be doing some Q&A at the end of the presentation, and if you look at the aisles, you'll see that there are some mics there, so don't be shy, step out during the Q&A session to the mic and ask your question. Also, feel free to reach out to the speaker through the app in case you don't get a chance to ask your question here. And speaking of the app, I do hope you have all downloaded the app because all the activities are in the app. We'll be using the app to vote as well for some of the sessions, so make sure you have it close on hand. So taking it beyond Connect and join the conversation. So keep an eye for exciting sponsor and exhibition competition that will be running throughout the event. If you have any question, our on-site app help desk will be available at the registration to assist you. Now to the session and our speakers. So it's the session on artificial intelligence, efficiency and engagement. So we have Louis Rousseau and Isaiah Skunken who will be joining us in the conversation. So over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Today we're going to talk to you about AI efficiency, engagement, we had to shorten the title a bit to fit in there, and fairness. I'm going to talk a little bit about the first part, really looking at what is AI, how does it compare to the big data hype of 10 years ago or so, and how that might interpret what's happening now. I'm also going to look at some of the examples that are coming out in the life insurance industry in terms of use cases, and then also say, can we think differently? Is there something that's going to be more disruptive than just efficiency gains? Izan will then cover sort of the world, all the difficult topics, the world of work, and sort of the fairness topic, which I think is a huge thing that AI has really put a spotlight onto fairness and almost making us re-look at things that we've already considered to be fair and rethink some of the things that we're doing. So without further ado, I'm going to talk about big data first. So back in the 2013, 14, and so on, I was talking a lot about big data and the impact it might have on the life insurance industry. This is a Google search trend chart, which shows how many people are searching for the words big data over time. And you can see it spiking up and kind of remaining high. There's a weird little spike at the end, which I haven't figured out. But the point is, there was a lot of hype around that, and we're sitting here 10, 15 years later and sort of thinking about how much of that really came out. At the time, this was based on a McKinsey report that I presented this slide 10 years ago, probably in this room. This was the kind of things that we said was going to happen with big data. We can create lots of transparency. Customers are going to be able to unlock value because they through data can access the best solutions for their problems. It's going to enable experimentations. Remember people playing with the headline on their website, which one engages more clicks, that sort of experimentation. That's drifted into insurance more, the general side, where people are experimenting with premium rates and testing premiums and things like that. So that kind of thing has emerged. It allows segmentation and customization, going down to the segment of one, resuming into customers and trying to see what fits for that customer, what's the right price, what's the right way to engage. It said that it's going to replace and support human decision-making and obviously lead to a lot of innovation. So the question is, how much of this has really come to pass? I think a lot of it has come to pass. A lot of things have developed, but there's a lot of things that we learned along the way. And what I certainly learned is it's a journey, it's not a destination. And that's kind of the message that I want to talk to you about here. I'm going to do that first with this example. This is an example of just a guy in his garage. The story is there was a Netflix prize for rating to predict which customer is going to rate their next movie. Based on the history of ratings of a customer, what is their likely rating for the next movie they're going to watch, or what would they rate movies that they haven't watched yet? And this was kind of a model that the Netflix thought was worth a lot of money. They put a $1 million prize on it. They gave the data to external people in an anonymized form, and they asked teams to compete to predict do these predictions, and they had a holdout sample, so they tested these predictions. By the way, for the Gen Zs, that was based on DVD rentals, right? Those little shiny discs, right? So that competition, there was a bunch of strong analytical teams, well-known teams that were competing in that, and at the top of the leaderboard, they're exchanging notes, and then all of a sudden, a team called Just a Guy popped to the top of the leaderboard with a new model, and nobody knew who it was. Eventually, they figured out it's a psychologist and his daughter, who's helping him with the maths, who suddenly built a model that was right up there with the top leading analytics teams in the world at the time. And what they found was really, and what the guy did was not anything complex on the analytics front, but he had domain knowledge. He knew how people behaved. So he used some of his domain knowledge about people rating movies, seeing a good movie, and the next movie, if it's also good, it's not going to get the same rating because you have some biases in there, recency biases, all sorts of things like that. He coded some of those indicators into his data set, and that allowed his model to perform right up there with the top analytical teams at the time. Unfortunately, this is not a happy ending for him. The other teams realized what he was doing, and they started doing the same. And then, obviously, combined with the advanced analytics, as well as the domain knowledge, they actually exceeded, and the prize went to one of the big teams. I can't remember which. But that's really a story about the journey, and part of the journey is the domain knowledge. Really, you need to continue to know what you're doing, particularly in life insurance, where there's a long-term set of assumptions and long-term sort of things that we're dealing with. You can't just leave it to the machines because there's a domain knowledge that's absolutely important. We also need to understand our data. The data that goes into these processes are very important, and then keeping it simple, right? Starting simple, leap before you walk, before you leap, before you run, before you leap. Sorry, getting that all mixed up. So starting with the walking, and be able to explain your results and engage with people and understand the results, and really have things that are concrete for people to start to learn to trust. And that also leads to skills being developed in teams such that you can broaden that out. So a big bang approach with this kind of stuff didn't really work. You needed to take people on the journey with you as opposed to starting with the most complicated thing. And then the other thing is people tended to overestimate the impact in the short term and underestimated the impact in the long term. We all thought we're going to do an eye scan and get our life insurance underwritten in 2020. That didn't come to pass, but there's been lots of fundamental progress that we've seen over the process. So this is the AI Hub, just to compare now. I put the Google search trend for artificial intelligence and the one that I showed before on the same scale now, and it's off the charts, right? So I think there's definite overestimation, in my opinion, definite overestimation of the short-term impact and underestimation of the long-term impact potentially on the cards at the moment. So we just need to bear that in mind. So how did we get here? There was this new opportunity really emerged because we had large amounts of data digitized, i.e. the whole of the internet, pretty much, digitized that can be used for training, right? So that's what enabled this AI revolution. And then also development of the computing power, and particularly the graphics processing units, or the GPUs, that allows people to quickly calculate these neural networks that they need to run for these models to work. So those GPUs happen to be very good at sort of these similar calculations as neural network calculations, and there have been new sort of advances in ways to refine and tune the neural network weights. Remember, those neural networks have little weights and they need to be tuned. There's new ways to do that. And then there's also changes in the activation functions, and also the development of transformers, which many see as one of the fundamental steps that really led to this revolution. As Google, I think it was a Google paper that sort of set out how to develop these transformer things, and these transformers allow ones to better relate different, in the case of language, better relate words in a sentence together as concepts as opposed to treating them as individual items. So this development of transformers help these neural networks better understand, for lack of a better word, the relationship between words in a sentence and across sentences as well. So those are the things that really fundamentally led to this opportunity. So I see this as a new tool in our tool bag, and this is kind of the spectrum of the tool bag for analytics and in life insurance. We have the human expert, We have our rules-based engine, which was the next sort of development there, sort of simple rules based on human knowledge. If this, then that, those kind of knowledges. Then we have our linear models, which we're starting to know and trust in life insurance. And then we have machine learning techniques that really take that a little bit further. That's sort of this is where the big data sort of ends. And then we have this large language models that we're seeing developing now. The ones on the left tend to be better trained on, be more trained on specific data sets, right? The humans there's an underwriter, there's a claims assessor, there's a rules-based engine that's for underwriting, there's linear models to predict mortality, machine learning to predict underwriting outcomes. Those kind of things tend to be trained on specific data sets, whereas the large language models tend to be trained on the internet, more general data set, not specific to the problems we're trying to solve. So that's a big differentiator that we need to keep in mind there as well. But there's another tool in our toolbag that we need to think about how to use. How do we use these tools? I think the obvious one is semantic search, which we already see this is a summary from our January CTO, who basically says these are the key use cases. Semantic search being really, you used to search what is the biggest planet in the solar system. Google will give you the link to the NASA website, and there you'll find the information. Now when you search for it, you get a box at the top that says Jupiter is the largest planet. So that's semantic search. The search understands what you're looking for and then gives you the answer as opposed to just a link to the website. Summarization is emerging as a pretty big use case in life insurance, particularly for large amounts of unstructured data during underwriting and claims assessment. How do you summarize that information, save the underwriter's time, and use that effectively to make the decisions? Synthesis is just an advanced summarization where you're looking at multiple sources of information across different areas. And then we have classification, which is an example of using it slightly differently. It's classifying unstructured data that you see. So if you're getting unstructured data in, can you put it in boxes? Can you, for example, put claim causes, free text claim causes into boxes of causes and things like that. That's a way to structure your unstructured data for more traditional analysis as well. And then sentiment is another way in terms of where we can start to look at the tone of the conversation rather than the facts of the conversation, and that might be useful in engaging with customers. Translation is an obvious one, and data extraction is also a pretty important one in the life space in terms of, together with the summarization, extracting key bits of information from a medical report, for example, getting the height, the weight, the age, those kind of things, extracting that information, not only summarizing, but actually extracting that information for input into a digital process. And then content creation, I don't need to really dwell on. There's so much on that. So in our life insurance world, how do we experiment while focusing on our objectives? Now, generally what we find is combining sort of your technical AI expertise, people who know how to use these tools, people know how to code these up, and with subject matter expertise seems to be doing well. When we do these little experiments, these projects, we start small, we play around with it, we put up a very, very sticky type little app, and then we see what works and what not, and iterate with feedback. So we think that kind of stuff works very well in terms of finding where the value lies with these things, and then leveraging robust IT infrastructure that allows you to experiment in that way is quite important. So making sure that all the legal T's and C's are crossed, because there's lots of legal things here to watch out for, lots of personal information, all that sort of stuff. You need to check all the boxes, make sure all of those things are there, and then have a platform that allows simple and easy experimentation, which is important. This also leads us to a discussion where the role of IT is potentially changing. The role of IT and the business users is changing, because the business users can take on a little bit more than they used to, and that world of work is shifting. So what are some of the things that we've seen? And these are generally examples, but they could be from any of your companies. Insurance companies are doing this as well. This is the example of summarization. Now, when you apply for life insurance, particularly if you've had a few medical issues along the way, you probably get asked for your medical reports, or you can get from Carlo, the cardiologist, you can get a cardiologist report, you get a pulmonologist report, you get a urologist, and then you have inappropriately named MD there on the bottom right as well. And that sort of, those kind of reports are quite unstructured, but you have to look at them, right? Because if the person discloses something, and if something is disclosed in those reports, how do you make sure that you're actually capturing that information and doing that in an efficient way? Because you only have so many underwriters in the South African market or in any markets. Underwriters are a scarce resource. So how you do that, and we've, with this method of working, we've developed an AI underwriting summary tool. This is just an example of that, summarizing maybe 5 or 6 different medical reports, policy forms, questionnaires, all that sort of stuff into a list of pre-existing conditions with page references, cross-references, etc., so that you can then, the underwriter can much more quickly look through the information, get a sort of a structure of the information, because this information, get structure of this information, because it's really tough for those underwriters. Sometimes you get like 100 pages scanned 3 times, faxed once, and then scanned again. You know, that's the kind of stuff that they get with different formats, and sometimes pages are duplicated, sometimes are out of order, etc., etc. So just navigating the document is already a huge use case there, but then actually finding the right conditions and having those referenced and checked there. The human is still needing to make the decision because, you know, the AIs are not perfect, so the humans are still needing to make the decision, but at least they can navigate the data that they're getting quite good. Even bad handwriting seems to be dealt with. This is a colleague of mine who did a fake application, and he wrote this. And he wrote here something about an in situ carcinoma, but he says, look in the medical reports for the details, right? But there was this, in this case, we had like 50 to 100 pages in the document, and it was nowhere else actually mentioned. He tested it specifically, and that did make it to our little list of summary things. So it found that in situ carcinoma, if you see it there. If you can't read, I can barely read that. And it found it and it summarized it for us. So that's the kind of stuff that's happening there. Other example in life, in particular, is unstructured data. I mentioned claim causes already. You know, taking unstructured data, making it structured, and then you can use traditional analytical methods, maybe a traditional mortality analysis to see what's your mortality by cause or your disability rates by cause, those kind of things, or looking at occupation data as well. We often receive quite unstructured data on occupation. How can we box those people into different boxes such that we can actually analyze this robustly? That's kind of also talking to a hybrid approach, using AI to structure the information and then using a more traditional approach to make the decisions on, which is also something that we'll cover later. There's also lots of work being done on policy documents. We've done a lot of work on our reinsurance contracts, obviously having lots of reinsurance contracts with addendums and changes and all that. That's quite useful to have an AI tool to talk to. Policy documents, comparing policy documents, checking out differences, and even to the extent that you can highlight what the requirements are for particular claims, particularly in the CI space, that kind of stuff. What kind of requirements is relevant for a particular CI? This kind of cancer. What do you need to claim? Checking that with those quite complex and detailed CI definitions that we have in the market is quite useful. So that's some of the use cases there. Embeddings is another form of structuring data, but it's a numerical one, so it's a little bit more advanced use case, but really turning text, unstructured data into numbers and then using those numbers into further analysis. So that's the kind of examples that we're looking at. But the examples that I talked to now was, a lot of them were really efficiency examples, right? It's just making, running a little bit faster in the hamster wheel, right? It's not really getting you to a different destination. It's really all about efficiency. So I'm liking to think about what will be disruptive, what will change the way we operate, in the way we work as an industry, and what does disruption really mean? So I'm going to start with that, and then just talk a little bit about one example which I think might be disruptive just now. So low-end disruption is something that Christensen in his book sort of really coined, and it's quite an old concept, but I think it's quite relevant here for me. A disruption with a new technology, a new entrant enters a market with a new technology that allows them to address the low end, the least profitable customers in a particular market quite well, because they suddenly be able to, using technology, they be able to do it more better, and in some way address that need without having the sort of low margin problem. And what they then do is they start to innovate. the incumbents in that industry are all sitting up there addressing the high and medium end of the market, and they keep, they're quite happy. Somebody's stealing our least profitable customers. They're not going to do much, right? And the low-end disruptor then actually innovates on that new technology until it becomes good enough for more and more of the market, right? And as that progresses up the chain, you get this sort of disruptive effect where, for example, the classic example was where web news replaces print news, right? That's the kind of thing that's happening, that could happen here. So these kind of disruptions really need to be a low-tech way to address these solutions, a tech way to address these solutions, but address the sort of low-end customers that are not really being addressed, right? There's no real solution for them. So one of the things that I think is potentially in this space, and Jeremy mentioned in his talk this earlier, he mentioned advice, right? And I think one of the areas where advice is lacking is at the low end, low sums assured policies in the life insurance market. And I think this tool that we have that allows us to talk to customers in a way, different languages and all sorts of other things, talks to customers in a different way at their level, is perhaps something that could provide some advice at the low end. Now, there's lots of legal things that need to be checked with this, but the basic concept is, can you solve low policy sums assured advice in a simple way with a tool like this? So this is just me. This is one of my early experiments. Just pretend I just did a simple prompt against a standard AI model, said, pretend you're an advisor. I'm a guy with a wife. We earn similar incomes. I'm slightly overweight. My wife isn't. That's in no way bearing any relevance to reality there. Let me just put that out there. And what advice would you give, right? And this is what it came up with. No specific training, no specific tools. It says, look at your life insurance. You need to consider your mortgage, your debts, your children's education, ongoing expenses, etc., etc. All reasonable kind of advice. Prioritize securing your disability insurance. Look for policies with good definitions. Don't buy the policies with the bad definitions. It's pretty good advice, actually, come to think of it, right? And then review and work with professionals. Very generic advice. I've gone further, and I've actually developed a proof of concept tool which actually gives you a bit more advice and structured and takes a hybrid approach. It kind of de-risks the advice tool just does the inputs and the outputs, but the heavy lifting, the actual calculations of what your insurance need is done by a simple calculator still, but the large language model sits as a front end to that. So that's a way in which you can de-risk it, get no hallucinations out, but also still get the engagement. Because what I could do here is I can actually tell this, I didn't have time for all the examples, but I could tell it, please give this advice in Xhosa, and it would do it. Please give advice for somebody who hasn't got a high school, didn't finish their high school, give the advice in a very simple language. That kind of stuff is quite powerful, particularly at the low end, I think. So that's what I find interesting there. Another one where we engage with customers is where we look at claims letters and things like that, helping drafting sort of these difficult claims letters that we need to write. I'm not going to go into the great amount of detail here, but just to say that this is a claim we're declining on mental illness, and the response was quite a good response, but the paragraph we wanted to highlight is, it is not our intention to minimize the impact that your condition may have on your daily life, but rather to follow the guidelines established in our policy and make a fair and accurate assessment. Now, I think that's a really good phrasing for a claims letter to somebody. I think using these tools in this way, obviously with human oversight, I think is going to help us become, change the way we engage with our customers, and I think that's quite useful. It's not going to obviously make the customer happy because it's still a decline, but at least we're telling it to them in a good way. So that's kind of my summary of how we got there and what might be potentially disruptive. Izan will cover now the world of work as I jumped ahead and the fairness aspect. Thanks.
Cool. Can you guys hear me? Sure. So apparently this is the difficult part, according to Louis. So let's buckle up. Louis has shown us how AI can be embedded in our workflows. But what I'd like to do is just to take a step back and ask a bit more of a human question. What does our day-to-day look like in this new world? Because the reality is, automation changes jobs. We've seen this before. In the Industrial Revolution, many manual jobs were lost. But in their place, many new jobs were created in engineering, in supervision, in machine maintenance. It wasn't the end of work, it was just a change or a shift in the nature of work. And we're seeing a same shift today. It's true, a lot of jobs that are administrative and repetitive and process-driven may disappear. But in this world of automation, the value of critical thinking, of human judgment, and of domain expertise only rises. We heard in the opening plenary that we need to adjust and we need to accept AI. And that's very true. And I think we're in a fortunate position compared to the Industrial Revolution. Because in the Industrial Revolution, it would have taken decades or generations for people to adapt to the new kind of work. But we can upskill, we should upskill within years, and we'll be ready within our generation. Let's think about 30 years ago, another example. There were genuinely people that believed that Excel would replace actuaries. What it actually did is it just magnified our capabilities, and the demand for actuarial skills continued to grow. AI can follow the same trajectory, not replacing us, but enhancing us. I do think we should take a moment to just acknowledge the South African context, because we live in a country that's already wrestling with high rates of unemployment, unskilled and low-skilled jobs. We can't just ask the question of what's going to change. We also have to ask, how do we ensure the change is inclusive? That this transformation doesn't widen existing gaps, but helps us bridge them. Okay, that was the slide. Now that AI is being embedded in our pricing and in our underwriting, fairness and discrimination is taking center stage. AI is expert at detecting hidden patterns, but those hidden patterns can reinforce existing stereotypes, especially when it's trained on hidden data, unbiased data. Even actuarially accepted practices like rating by sex is being re-examined. And big data, like Louis spoke about, is uncovering new variables. But these variables can be proxies for protected traits. A simple example, postal code can encode socioeconomic status. Your credit score might say something about generational wealth. It might not, but it might. That's discrimination by proxy. And it's incredibly hard to detect in any model, even in the GLMs that we use today. It's even worse and more difficult in these complicated models. They can sometimes feel like a black box. Consumers are growing more aware, and regulators are tightening standards. The effect of this is that a new social contract is emerging, and it doesn't just require technical accuracy, but it requires us to think about what's fair. Now, to delve a bit deeper into this concept of fairness, consider a hypothetical population. You've got some males, some of them are low income, some of them have genetic diseases like Huntington's, some of them have conditions that are partly lifestyle, partly genetic like cholesterol, and some of them have hazardous hobbies. I immediately think skydiving, but I'm sure it's not always that extreme. From an actuarial perspective, it's clear that many of these traits, if not each of them, will impact expected claims. But from an ethical perspective, the picture is more complex. How do we decide? How do regulators decide? What is fair to discriminate on and what is not? That is incredibly complex. And to help guide us through these questions, I'm going to talk us through what's called the distributive justice principles. So this is not mathematical, it's ethical, but it will help us understand how these decisions are made. So 6 principles, quite distinct though. First up is egalitarianism. Everyone pays the same premium. Then you have the difference principle, which basically says inequality is acceptable, but only if it benefits the least advantaged. Then you've got luck egalitarianism, which aims to reward good choices, but not reward or penalize pure luck. Welfare-based principles aim to maximize the overall benefit to society. And desert-based principles want to reward you for good choices and behavior. A lot of wellness programs fall under this category, which is ironic because I don't think you should eat dessert when you are part of a wellness program. Finally, we have libertarianism. The insurance company can do what it wants. Not one of these principles helps us answer the question of what is fair discrimination and what is unfair discrimination. But they can help us to ask the right questions when we are trying to answer this. Okay, let's go back to our hypothetical scenario. I'm going to try and apply just a few of these principles to the scenario so that you can see how it would affect some of the rules we have. So, strict egalitarianism would say, doesn't matter that this person has hazardous hobbies, doesn't matter that they have cholesterol, they'll pay the same premium as everyone else. So a good example of this is actually in group risk, and it only really works because it's compulsory. So if it's not compulsory, you could endanger the sustainability of the scheme. If we wanted to look at income, this is a really good place to look at the example of the difference principle. So, in the UK, they take, well, we should all, but postal code is a very good proxy for socioeconomic status. And in the UK, insurance companies will use postal code to rate annuities. The reasoning is that this would probably result in lower premiums for the least advantaged in society. These same insurance companies will not use postal code to rate life assurance products, because the flip side is true. The most disadvantaged in society are likely to then have to pay the most premiums. This is a clear application of the difference principle. Same country, same data point, different applications. Luck egalitarianism can also easily be applied to this scenario. The people who go skydiving every second week, penalized for that behavior. But the people who have Huntington's disease, no penalization for that. Clearly, this is a very clear-cut example, but there are some conditions and variables which make luck egalitarianism very difficult to apply. One of those is cholesterol, because there's a clear genetic component. So luck egalitarianism would say, don't penalize. But there's a clear lifestyle component, and luck egalitarianism would say penalize. So there's a lot of gray area. Income is another good example. There's an element of lifestyle and choices, but there's also an element of luck. The point is that none of these 6 principles are the silver bullet example or answer. The point is that different countries, different products, different regulators place different weight on each of these principles. And that's how fairness is decided globally. So we've seen how the UK uses the difference principle in annuities and life insurance. In the EU, there's a turn against using any sort of genetic information when rating life assurance products. And specifically, rating using sex is not allowed. But any lifestyle factors like smoking, that's allowed. So here, it's a clear application of the luck egalitarianism principle. We can see how the EU would have arrived at this definition of fairness that they've all embraced. But now, the actuaries in the room have to actually apply this and make sure that we don't discriminate by sex, but we do discriminate by smoker status, well, as an example. Enter discrimination-free pricing. This is just one way of looking at it. A few years ago, Ronald Richman and some of his colleagues published a paper on what they call discrimination-free pricing. And in it, they define 3 different prices. The first is the best estimate premium. This is purely risk-based, does not attempt to avoid any sort of discrimination. If we had all the data in the world and no rules, this is what we would want. Next up, we have what's called the unawareness price. So this price might look right because we are avoiding actually using protected traits like sex in rating, but it does not avoid indirect discrimination. That's where they arrive at the last price, which is the discrimination-free price, which avoids both indirect and direct discrimination. It does this by ensuring that its models can't infer protected traits through correlations with other variables. Because there's a paradox. Sometimes, when you don't rate by a certain variable or you don't consider it, you might indirectly end up discriminating based on that variable. Let's assume we're all actuaries in the EU, and we want to calculate a mortality adjustment for smokers. We have a pool of smokers, and there are males and females in there. We calculate this mortality adjustment for smokers, but we're assuming, and it's likely true, that the smoker pool is dominated by males, right? So that resulting smoker adjustment would also have an adjustment for male mortality. The result is that female smokers will overpay, even though we never included sex in our models. AI is particularly prone to this because it is so good at picking up those hidden correlations. If we want to include AI in our pricing process, but still have a fair price, we need to be very clear about what is excluded from our models. And we also have to put into place principles and guidelines to ensure that our models can't reconstruct the protected traits through hidden correlations. We need to know the variable we are trying to avoid in order to avoid it. So this brings us to this place. It's complicated. In a world of big data and these complex algorithms, it's so easy to personalize risk to the nth degree. But hyper-personalization can leave some people uninsurable. And big data and AI might be reinforcing existing stereotypes. Transparency is key if we don't want to risk losing trust. Our pricing models need to be justifiable, transparent, explainable, and very importantly, aligned with societal expectations. A new social contract is emerging. And this social contract was recently put to the test in Australia, where a decision that was made by a machine was legally challenged. So in Australia, they have these simple products where you can go online, fill in a questionnaire, and it assesses you automatically. You've got cover, you don't have cover. So a client went online to apply for life insurance. She completed the questionnaire. She indicated in the questionnaire that she has a mental health condition. She was automatically declined because of this. And she sued the insurance company for discrimination based on this pre-existing condition. Mental health and mental disabilities are protected traits under Australian law, so you can't discriminate based on those traits. And the insurance company did not deny that they were discriminating based on mental health. It's true. But they relied on a specific exception in Australian law, which allows you to discriminate, or the insurer to discriminate, if they can prove that that discrimination is based on sound actuarial data. And the court agreed. Because this rules-based engine that was used was built on a framework designed by humans. That framework was grounded in logic and testing, and the decision could be explained. Automation was fine, but only because it was grounded in logic and it was explainable. In South Africa, under PAPIA, we have the same similar sets of rules where if a decision made by a machine has a significant impact on an individual, that's not allowed. Except, again, if the insurer can prove that it was based on sound reasoning and facts and logic. Automation is allowed, but only if it's transparent, if it's reasonable, and there's accountability. So, clearly this case is not even touching on these complicated AI models being incorporated into insurance. It's the rules-based engine. But because of the state of regulation not being as developed for AI, and this really only becoming a part of the lexicon now, we don't have case studies to refer back to. But this does provide a very good foundation for us to start developing our thinking about the obstacles we might run into in the future, especially because insurers are so often targets of litigation. Now, the state of regulation is disparate. It's in different states, in different parts of the world, and also different parts of the world are taking different approaches. And that's what we've attempted to illustrate here. So this is not a legal opinion, and it's subject to change, but we're just trying to illustrate the fact that the world has not come to an agreement about what AI is and how to regulate it. And this makes it particularly tough for multinationals that operate in different countries where regulation looks different. In the US, it's fragmented, which shouldn't be a big surprise, with different states taking different approaches. But federal interest is growing. On the far side of the map, China is implementing rigid, strict, and fast-moving interim measures. The UK seems to be taking a pro-innovation approach. There's some principle-based guidelines, but there's no firm regulation yet. And it's in the EU that we find the most developed framework, the EU AI Act. It's a risk-based act, so you can think of it as SAM, but for algorithms. And in the act, it defines what it calls high-risk systems. So high-risk systems, very obvious examples are defense and policing, which are named explicitly. And for these high-risk systems where AI is implemented, there are strict requirements. And the reasons for this are to ensure transparency, safety, and the protection of fundamental rights. And now the reason why I mention this is because another application is mentioned as a high-risk system explicitly, and that is pricing and underwriting for life and health insurance. We are right there up with defense and policing, and we have to comply with the same requirements. And one of those requirements is human oversight. It's stipulated. You can't just let a machine run rampant. What the Act also does, it draws a clear line between what is and what isn't AI. So if you have a simple rules-based engine, and it's been codified based on human knowledge, follows some rules, the what-if statements that we were talking about, that's not AI. So the machine in the case study wouldn't be AI under this Act. If you have a model in a spreadsheet and it's helping you to calibrate your assumptions, that's also not AI. But take that same model and embed it in a system that learns, that recommends, that infers in real time, that is AI. Same model, but it falls under a different category. The key feature here is automation, is autonomy. And with autonomy comes complexity, because these models learn, they adjust, and sometimes they surprise us. Which brings us to what I hope is a practical conclusion. The best systems, the most ethical and efficient ones, fall somewhere in the middle. They're hybrid. They blend the machine with the human. Louis mentioned quite a few examples of this. So one way of looking at it is interacting with an AI to get advice, but at the basis of this, really, it was encoded on a rules-based engine or a human. On the flip side, an example of this is what Louis mentioned about taking unstructured data and structuring it, and then using that in our traditional actuarial approaches, so your simple GLMs or whatever. It's machine-assisted, but it's human-governed, and that may be the sweet spot. It's not automation instead of judgment. It's automation guided by judgment. Insurance is changing. AI is not a trend. But we as actuaries find ourselves at such a unique vantage point. We are not just observing this revolution. We are enablers of innovation. We are stewards of trust. And we are navigators of this complexity. Organizations that will survive are the ones that will balance both transformation and fairness and inclusivity, and who can recognize that regulation and issues of fairness and trust are not obstacles, but enablers. AI is going to help us build the future of insurance, but ethics will determine whether people trust us to. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Izan and Louis, for that insightful presentation. I'm going to open the floor now for any questions. I'm sure there's a bunch. We've got mics over there, and over here. So please step up. We have around about 15 minutes for questions and answers, so keep your questions short so that Izan and Louis can get to it. I see a hand over there. You can just walk to the mic. It's the closest one is just here in the... And you can just state your name and who you want to direct the question to. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Simi de Klerk. Thanks for the very interesting presentation. I've got two questions. One, on the AI underwriting document miner, I would imagine that it's pretty good at picking things up, and if it says something's there, it's there. How do you trust then when it says these 10 things are the only things, that it didn't miss anything? Do you not still need to go back and trawl through all 100 things yourself? And then my second one is on the Australian example. How would you map that against those justice principles? Because it sort of sounded like it started off at a social justice, let's not discriminate based on mental health thing, but then it ended up with a, well, if the number says there's something there, we do it. Yeah, those are my two. Thanks.
I'll start. The summarization is a new thing, right? It's relatively new. So you need to make sure that you look at all the documents, because it does miss things, so it's not perfect. With any underwriting process, though, there are errors that can slip in. Any change in an underwriting process can result in errors, and then you need to measure that error. So what we're doing is we're working on this, refining it, obviously improving the summarization. We're monitoring it, we're testing it, we're making sure our underwriters are on the journey with us, so they are testing it and using it on a side-by-side basis, still following their full process. At some point, particularly possibly not in a reinsurance underwriting space, perhaps in an insurance underwriting, you might say, I am going to just look at the summary and ignore the full documents, because I have a margin of error built into my pricing, or a margin of error built in, and I've studied the errors that I have seen in this process, and I can quantify them so that I can adjust my best estimate. Similar to which you would do with any accelerated or predictive underwriting model is the way I would generally pitch it out. Yeah.
Thank you.
And then on the fairness?
Yeah, so that's such a good question. I think we can extrapolate a bit. So from this case study, it's not entirely clear which of the distributive justice principles are applied in Australia. We now know that some form of discrimination is allowed, so it's definitely not strict egalitarianism. I'm not entirely sure of the rules that they have, but in South Africa, the PPA also says that no discrimination is allowed. The Constitution says no discrimination is allowed. But that doesn't mean we're not allowed to risk rate. So there's a difference between not discriminating unless the exception holds, and not discriminating based on a protected trait. So in South Africa, race and religion, protected traits. Mental disability, you're not allowed to discriminate based on mental disability unless you enact the insurance exception, which says that if it's based in data and you can justify it, you are allowed to. So that, in my view, is a bit of like egalitarianism, probably.
Yeah. I would sort of add to that. I'd say the society there has made a decision already, and South Africa is pretty similar, has allowed insurance to discriminate on certain characteristics that would otherwise be protected. So that's that might have been on one of those distributive justice principles. The point is the society needs to decide, and when society hasn't decided, it leaves a little bit of a vacuum for us actuaries, because we need to figure out what society will decide or might decide, right? What the press might decide potentially, right? So that's the problem that we face. it's complicated. So we can't really say what's fair. Well, we just know it's very complicated. And then going on, what it does do is does establish that, you know, a rule-based system is allowed to discriminate if it's based on sound evidence, which was, I mean, they used statistical data to say that, you know, people with mental health conditions on app forms need to, are going to claim with a far higher degree on their disability. I think this was a disability offering. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for your question. Any other questions from the floor?
Over there.
Oh, we've got one there. Will you just step up to the mic, introduce yourself, and ask your question?
Hi, hello, I'm Marissa Petersen. I wanted to ask, how do you see us bringing AI into the actuarial education syllabus? And I'm thinking particularly of that pesky communications exam.
Oh, yes.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean, I don't, I mean, I think there are initiatives to look at it, and there are definitely like ideas that are in the making. I should know more about them, but there are the ideas to bring more of this into education, to figure out how to use these tools. I think it's a bit of a, you can't really educate until you've kind of learned what works and what doesn't work, so it's a bit of a, you know, chicken and egg situation at the moment. So as practice develops, I'm assuming people will start seeing what works and how actuaries can use it. I think what we like you see in the life space in particular is with the long-term view that we need, there's still a large amount of judgment that goes into our long-term assumption setting, at least, you know, on that space, which I think needs a lot of judgment. So I think that hybrid approach of using this where it's appropriate, but making sure that there's a significant long-term, particularly on the long-term stuff, an overlay is important. And I think in communications, I think it can help. I think people are using it to improve their communications. I often write an email and I say, can you improve on this, or tell me where it's unclear, and it'll point out a few things to me and things like that. So people are using it to improve their written communications. There are also tools that are quite scary in a way, that allow you to use it while you're talking, right? It listens to a Teams call, and that's a bit scary because, you know, that could really lead to, you know, are you dealing with a person? You know, that sort of, it feels, it's going to be disorientating. So I'm quite concerned about that a little bit, particularly in the exam setting as well.
Okay. Cool, thank you. I'm glad you mentioned the basis setting because I was like toying with that idea while I was listening to you speaking. Cool.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for your question. I know I saw, yeah, great.
Hello. Thanks for the presentation. I was lucky enough to hear it the first time, and it was very interesting. And even on a second listen, it was just as interesting. Maybe a first comment to Simi's first question, because I was thinking the same thing around, do you need to then review what the bot has done or what the AI has done? Then I was thinking, get an independent AI to QA the initial bot, and then I was like, maybe there's a conflict of interest there. But I guess even if you have people doing these exercises, there's a risk of error, and you as an insurer or a reinsurer would need to put in some kind of quality control on it. So similarly, we'd probably need something like that. But my question was on the regulation slide, and just the lack of regulation in Africa and South Africa. And I just wanted to get your view in terms of, like, are you concerned about this? Is this something that the regulator is ignoring until it becomes a problem, or are you all aware of conversations happening, you know, with the regulatory bodies or industry bodies, where they're starting to think about the impacts that this could have and how they should regulate this industry?
Yeah.
Thanks.
Can I do that one? There's a risk. I mean, I think a lot of it is actually covered already, not directly. There's rules that do cover the use of automation, right? And if you put AI under that rule, then there are some guidance there already. So I think in a way, it's good not to duplicate the effort, right? There might be areas that, now that's talking to the use of AI, right? Not the discrimination piece. I think the discrimination piece is more tricky, but I don't think we're going to solve it with legislation necessarily either. So that's kind of my personal views on this, but some clarity might be needed in some areas. I mean, yeah.
So I think what's important when it comes to the discrimination is it's not a new problem. What I was talking about unawareness price and the discrimination-free price, that is equally as applicable when you're using a GLM to price. And so that need for guidance is as relevant now as it will be in 10 years when we've embedded AI all the way through. Yeah.
Sorry, not really an answer, except it's complicated. And we're not legal experts.
Any other questions from the floor? Ah, here's another one.
Hi everyone, I'm Tsogofatso Rasroka, and I have two quick questions. One, given the South African landscape, and you mentioned with unemployment and all of those things, I wanted to know, how can we then empower our youth, right? Because they're going to be the ones coming into this even more in the next few years. So is there a sort of starting point, even if it is part of that sort of 5-year plan, especially given the varying education levels and access to education and tools? And then secondly, you've done a lot of research and put a lot of things in from what we've seen globally, but was there something in particular that you found in your research that you thought, you know, this maybe globally has worked, but definitely in South Africa, this one component definitely does not match our landscape?
You understood.
Well, I think this question of access is already, again, very applicable even without bringing AI into the conversation. And I know that's something that in the public sphere is getting discussed quite a lot. And it's really important to be raised in forums like this because all of us need to think about it. I don't have the answer, but when I was chatting this through with my family last night, and I was just also just thinking about this, like we're talking about where we're going, and we just need to make sure we're taking everyone with us. So it's a really fair point. Unfortunately, I don't think we have an answer for that.
Yeah, I mean, my views is that the thing that AI is not touching is services, personal services in particular. So I think tourism, those kind of things where you don't want an AI bot taking you around the winelands, you want somebody to talk to and things like that. So that kind of thing. So those kind of personal services, health services, all that kind of stuff, I think is areas where people are going to be needed. And then the education piece, I think, is the other piece, which I think is, you know, the more we can educate people, the more they can take advantage of these tools as opposed to, you know, creating, you know, if we had a bunch of, I don't know, some of our administrative type functions will be eaten by AI, I think, and how do you get those people skills up so that they can manage the AI as opposed to being replaced by it.
And plumbers will not lose their jobs.
Yeah, plumbing and building and all that sort of stuff as well.
And then my second question on the landscape, is there anything in your research that you found, no, this is not for South Africa at all?
Pardon?
So in your research, when you looked at all the global trends and the key themes in that, was there one in particular that you found that it would not be of service at all in South Africa, that like we can't just sort of uplift this and apply it this side?
I don't think so, no. I haven't seen anything. I mean, South Africa is traditionally quite an innovative market in the life insurance space, so we tend to be net exporters of good ideas, and you know, there's many examples of that. So yeah, I think there are good ideas elsewhere as well, but a lot of them are here already, in a sense, yeah.
Thank you so much for all the questions and once again for all the thought-provoking answers there. Remember, you can always go up to the speakers afterwards and speak to them and ask them any more questions, but that then brings us to an end for this session. Now, next up, we've got a discussion on mental wellness insurance, so come back for that. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.